The inside story on the issues that affect you and your community. This is Local 12 Newsmakers.
Good morning and welcome to Local 12 Newsmakers. I'm Dan Hurley. On this weekend after July 4th, we look at the state of American politics from two perspectives. In the second half of the show, we'll preview an interesting discussion you can join about the role of mayors in local politics in a year that Cincinnatians will choose a new mayor. But we begin with a Northern Kentuckian who has been in the fray and now has an opportunity to try to understand the larger dynamics of American political life. Trey Grayson served 2 terms as the Kentucky Secretary of State between 2002 and 2010. In 2010, he ran for the U.S. Senate seat, being vacated by the retiring Jim Bunning, but was defeated in the party primary by Rand Paul on a wave of Tea Party activism. In January 2011, Mr. Grayson became the director of the Institute for Politics at the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. The institute was founded in 1966 as a memorial to President Kennedy with the express intention to inspire Harvard undergraduates to consider careers in politics and public service. The institute also serves new members of Congress and newly elected mayors, the connection between parts 1 and 2, to prepare for their responsibilities to govern. Trey, welcome back to Newsmakers and welcome back to the area.
Thanks, it's great to be home.
So you're back visiting some family, friends?
Visiting family, friends, and also when we're done here, I'm going to drive around Kentucky and speak to the Kentucky Governor's Scholars Program campuses. There's 3 campuses across the state, so Moorhead, Murray, and Louisville.
Oh, great.
All over the next 3 days.
Very good.
Yeah.
So, you know, I was giving a little bit of background, and you've been a guest a couple years ago on here, but fill out that Institute of Politics and what you're really doing at this point and why you are interested in doing this.
It's kind of a complicated thing. I'm not a professor. I'm an administrator. I run a staff of about 18 individuals. We have an endowment that was given to us when the Kennedy family was raising money for the library and the museum, and we run off that. And as you said, our mission is to inspire students, young people, not just at Harvard, but around the country now with technology, to go into politics, government, public service, be inspired to give back, helping to fulfill one of President Kennedy's great legacies of getting people to give back to their country. And we also do a lot of things to bridge the political and academic worlds. You mentioned a couple conferences. We're hoping to have the new Cincinnati Mayor at our conference right after the election in 2013. We bring people to campus, speakers, heads of states, political leaders, for weeks, for a single night, for a semester. And then we do a lot of public service all across campus. It's a lot of fun. It's a great job for a political junkie like me. But the best part is really getting to hang around with students.
Now, you're a Kentuckian.
Yeah.
You're a Republican.
Yes.
How does all
I know where you're going with this.
How does all that play at Harvard in Boston?
Well, first, usually whoever I vote for loses. I most recently lost the special state U.S. Senate election. But it actually plays pretty well because we're nonpartisan, and we've been around for about 50 years, and having a Republican as the director is helpful because basically everybody on staff, most of the professors, most of the students, they're Democrats, and they're liberal Democrats. They're not Kentucky Democrats. So having somebody like me who is Republican, who's conservative, who has a network and some credibility, that can help me fill in the gaps. So for example, this past semester we had Eric Cantor, the Republican leader, David Keene, the president of the National Rifle Association, folks like that, and knowing that there's a Republican as the director gives meaning to the fact that we're bipartisan. So it really is helpful having that kind of balance.
I'm sure as you interact with students, you know, and they learn about who you are and what your career has been up till this point, I'm sure you get the question of, okay, you're a Republican, but you got defeated by Rand Paul, and how do you feel about that? I mean, what do you tell the students what the meaning of that is?
Well, what I say, step back and say, look, if I didn't believe that politics was an important thing, I couldn't go run an institution trying to get students to think better of it. And so going through that process, sure, I didn't want to lose. I wanted to win. I still think I should have won and would have been a better candidate, but the voters decided that wasn't for me. I've gotten over it. But this is a chance for me to serve in a different way, maybe to have some discussions that'll inspire some students or educate students or just the general public. I mean, that's one of the things that's really changed for us, especially since I became the director, is all of our stuff's online now. So we're reaching thousands of more individuals all across the planet, really, with our programming. But I love my elected experience. I love even that campaign. Other than election night, Election night wasn't so good. But the campaign itself, traveling around the state, and I remember doing a bus tour the week before the election, had pretty good crowds, people who really believed that my election was essential to their well-being, and were working really hard on my behalf. And that was pretty humbling, and it was, I think, sometimes hard for the folks like my wife and my parents who didn't see all that, because they were back here in northern Kentucky. Our daughters were young enough my wife and them didn't get to go out on the trail too much. They didn't see as much as that, but I did, and that I'll never forget those looks, those feelings, and it's what powered me on and inspired me.
One of the things is, I would think this is true for young people trying to remember how I got involved.
Yeah.
I got involved actively in politics in 1968 in the primaries, working for Gene McCarthy. Anti-war candidate,
yes.
all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That was my introduction to active politics. And campaigns have that, sparkle to them. But governing is different.
Governing's hard.
Governing is hard,
Yeah.
and people love to focus on the campaign part and not particularly on the governing part.
Yeah.
And when you were saying you bring people to the Institute who are newly elected, how do you help them make that transition?
Well, I'll start with the new members of Congress, because that's the most recent one that we had. So we had about 50 of the new members. We invite them all, but we had about 50. And we do some training on policy, because they don't get a chance to dive too deeply into policy on the campaign trail. And then we have some former members come back.
And isn't that ironic?
Yeah.
Because the campaign trail is not designed to talk about policy.
Yeah, we're certainly not at the level that they need to understand when they go into office. And so what I loved was, for example, Harvard professor Larry Summers, former president of the university, former Treasury Secretary, former economic advisor to President Obama. He comes in and speaks, and some of the more liberal Democrats thought he was too conservative. Some of the more conservative Republicans thought he was too liberal. So that meant to me, wow, he must be just right. That's what they kind of need to hear. But what we try to do at that particular meeting is also bring them together, because we recognize that the reality of the Congress right now is that Republicans and Democrats have almost zero interaction if they're not on the same committee or from the same state. And if they don't have this interaction and develop some of these relationships at our program, they may never get it. And we've heard stories over the years. We've been doing this since 1972. That's been pretty helpful. And it's interesting, this past group seemed very much aware that the public didn't like Congress, wanted to get things done, and at least they were talking about trying to do some things. But it's really hard, obviously, as a freshman of a body with 435 members to make much of an impact early on. Brett Winstrup from Cincinnati was one of the members who came to...
Do you maintain any ongoing contact with them?
We try to. What happens is when they come, we think of them as part of our family, and so we'll reach out to them when it's appropriate. Tulsi Gabbard, who's a freshman from Hawaii, came back to campus recently to talk to some students, and we do reach out to those freshmen and keep them in the loop and try, but it's hard because, again, there's 435 and they have their districts they got to worry about.
Well, one of the things you shared with me in sort of preparation for this was a survey that you've been doing about millennials, which are sort of the youngest generation who are now voters.
Right.
I forget whatever the definition is of millennials.
It's essentially anybody born, the term millennial kind of means anybody born from around 1980 to the early part of the last decade.
Okay.
Now, for the purpose of our survey, though, we just use 18 to 29 because that's a survey demographic, and they all fit into that millennial category.
Well, one of the things that came out of that was that this millennial generation really doesn't think that government as it's working now is the answer to the problems they're concerned about.
Right.
That's a scary conclusion.
It is, and it's an interesting when you dive into these numbers, and we've been surveying millennials for about not quite 15 years. It was actually an idea from one of our students back around 2000.
The original survey.
Yeah, the original survey. So we have a professional pollster that works with a committee of students, and every semester we do this. The students crunch the numbers and help write the report, and then they present it. And so we went to the New York Times, and the students gave presentations to the New York Times. We even went to the Republican National Committee. It's one of the things I was able to arrange, and we had students briefing the RNC because the Republican Party, my party, has real trouble with young voters. But yeah, there's a trust question we've been asking the last couple of times. How often do you trust the following institutions to do the right things most of the time? And these numbers are very, very low. The military is the most trusted institution, but federal government, Congress, the presidency are all really down there when it comes to trust. the stereotype and sort of the past has been that young people have a little bit more hope in the government, idealism, and I'm not saying from a liberal conservative thing, just that politics and the government can do some things. And these millennials have seen, you know, the financial crisis of '08, a tough economic, well, we're in a recovery, but it doesn't feel like it. They've seen individuals, institutions let them down. And so I think it's really impacted their views on politics. And they're also interesting because they supported President Obama. You know, they re-elected him. Well, they elected him in the first place. Then they re-elected him. Romney won over 30. Obama won under 30, but under 30 by more than he lost over 30, hence he's re-elected. But if you look at their approval ratings, they like him as a person, they don't like his policies. And so there's some interesting dynamics here that could shape politics.
And also, one of the things that came out in that survey was the activity of the millennials in politics in 2012 was not as big as in 28.
Correct.
Which, and some of that, second terms are always more different. I don't care who you are. When you're new and you're fresh and you haven't had to be tested yet, it always looks better.
It does, and it's a little bit confusing because this generation is the biggest generation we've ever had in America. So there are more...
Bigger than the baby boomers.
Bigger than the baby boomers.
Wait a minute.
Sorry about that. Bigger than the baby boomers. And so, so there are more of them who voted in 12 than 08. So as a share of the electorate, they were actually slightly bigger. But they should have been even bigger based upon how many came online in the last 4 years. And so their actual turnout was lower. And then, as you said, their activity level was a little bit lower, too.
I want to connect what you said about this to another part of that survey, which was about the millennials' attitudes about immigration. And a couple things emerge. One, the millennials, compared to the population as a whole, are more open to a path to leadership, less interested in border security. And yet it's border security that the Republicans really pushed in order to get a compromise bill through the Senate recently. It's now going to go to the House. And, you know, both in the Senate and some people in the House say that the Republicans need to grapple with immigration reform if they're not going to be irrelevant in the future. So now all of a sudden we have the millennials who are not, you know, particularly there. The immigration, how does all this fit together for the future of your party?
Well, it's a tough situation, and I think for anybody who's interested in this, the college Republicans put together a great report a couple years ago using some survey data, using ours as well as some data that they did, and I thought they did a great analysis of the challenges and opportunities that the party faces. Immigration is an interesting example. So this generation, in addition to being the biggest ever, is also the most diverse ever. And so some of the immigration views are probably the result of that. And you're right, they are more, I guess, open to comprehensive immigration reform, however you define it on all those metrics. But then if you also ask them, one of the parts of our survey, we asked people to say, which issue do you prefer? Do you want to get more jobs? Do you want to solve the immigration problem? Do you want to have a better relationship with China? Or do you want to do climate change? And we pair them all off. And immigration is actually kind of in the middle of the pack. So one thing that's interesting is even if the Republicans are a little out of step on that, it's not clear that this is a huge issue, defining issue for this generation. The one question the party, I think, has to ask itself is, and what I believe is that a lot of Hispanic voters in particular tune out the Republican Party because they think that, oh, they don't care about us, and some of this positioning is because of that. And so merely having Republicans help pass an immigration bill, I don't think it's going to be enough to swing them, but it might cause them to start considering you. And that's the first step. You got to get a voter to think about being for you, and then you try to win them on economics or any of the other traditional arguments.
I find this whole immigration debate interesting because those of us who live in greater Cincinnati, including northern Kentucky, I grew up in northern Kentucky, really historically it's been very low immigration. We have one of the lowest levels of foreign-born in our metro region, second only to Pittsburgh in terms of low.
And I think Kentucky has the lowest percentage of the states in the country.
So here we are talking about this national experience. You now live in Boston. Very different dynamic in terms of immigration, foreign-born. What's that feel like? Because when you go someplace else, if you really start visiting New York, Chicago, the Southwest, things start looking really different.
No, it does look different. The part of Boston where I live, Belmont, it's interesting because there's a lot of Asians, Chinese and Japanese students. When I went to my daughter's concert the other day, I was really struck by that. The city of Boston is essentially a minority city now, just the actual city. Like Cincinnati, the city of Boston is a smaller portion of the metro region than you might think based on jurisdictional lines. But it does look different. Although interestingly, I saw that Kentucky as a state, I don't know if this is true for Ohio, as a percentage is having a huge increase of Hispanic immigration to the state. Now, part of that is because it's a percentage and you start with a really low number. It doesn't take much to make that number bigger. I don't know if that's true for Metro Cincinnati, but I think what it does is it makes this issue maybe more difficult for voters to understand. There is an economic implication for all this. I've been studying a lot of this, and for the University of Cincinnati, for universities in Kentucky, all these immigrants come to America, and then we train them, and then we don't have enough jobs, and then they go back to their countries and create all these startups. So there's some economic arguments to trying to fix this problem.
Oh, there's a lot of economic
And I think
arguments.
one of the reasons why we're doing a little bit, there's a political element to why the Senate just passed this bill, but I think the economic argument is one that is persuading more voters.
Yeah. Well, we're out of time, unfortunately, and anytime you're back in town, I'd love to have you come back here.
Oh, this is great. Yeah.
Really enjoy talking with you.
Thanks,
and
Dan.
Anybody who has a chance to interact with students now across the country, it's great.
Thanks.
So
IOP.harvard.edu. All of our stuff's online. And,
okay, Institute for Politics.
Institute Politics, yep.
Okay. Welcome back. The 2013 Cincinnati Mayor's race is underway. The primary will be September 10th, with the general election on November 5th. The Mercantile Library, which dates back to 1835, is launching a program to help people think creatively about what we are about to do. The American Mayor series is a 4-part discussion about American mayors and their cities. Participants will have the opportunity to discuss the real-life challenges faced by Ed Randell in Philadelphia, and this is the opening book, with Richard Daley in Chicago, New York City in 1977, and Mike Stanton in Providence, Rhode Island. The best way to understand the community you and I live in is to get outside of it, to see things from another perspective. And that's exactly what this series makes possible. I'm joined this morning by the organizer and discussion leader for this series. Brendan Call is the Director of Government Relations and Regulatory Affairs for Kroger Company. He was also a principal staff person to Mayor Charlie Lucan when Mayor Lucan sat in the corner office at 8th and Plum. Brendan is a trustee of the Mercantile Library. And Albert Pyle, the Executive Director of the Mercantile Library. If you have never visited or used the Mercantile Library, this is your chance to familiarize yourself with one of the great organizations in this city, the true literary center of the region. Albert, welcome back.
Thanks.
Brendan, welcome to Newsmakers.
Thanks, Dan.
This is, I truly believe this is a useful thing that you're doing. How did you choose the individual books? One on New York City, one on Philadelphia, one on Chicago. Were they just obvious? One on Providence, Rhode Island. Were they obvious, or were there lots of choices out there, and these are the 4 that came out to the top?
I think, you know, with A Prayer for the City, that was probably the most obvious choice for me. It is one of the best books I've ever read about a city, about a mayor, about the challenges that a mayor faces. It's got a larger-than-life personality with Mayor Ed Randell, who went on to be governor and who you see now all over the television, on the news. He is a huge personality who represented his city to the world, really, and faced incredibly difficult times in Philadelphia. And through his work, through his use of power in politics, he was able to really put the city on a good path. You're rooting for him the entire book. It's a terrific book, not just about the mayor, not just about the city, but about just the entire community and how it works together. If you're interested in urban life, it's really one of the best books you can read.
Albert, you're gathering people together, and we'll give the specifics here in a bit, but these are all spread out beginning July 17th, right? So very soon, but spread out until the election, once a month, and from noon till 1:30. What are you hoping? I mean, obviously you're hoping people read first, but what are you hoping happens at these discussions?
I'm hoping people will get a different sense of what a mayor can be. I mean, we've come off of a long freeze on mayors. We're just now getting into where mayors in Cincinnati can actually do something after years of the charter reforms, which really, as I said, froze politics essentially. And I am hoping that people will see, oh, a mayor can actually be effective. I think being, you know, the mayor is the best position. A strong mayor has the best job in the country. It's better than president because you can actually get stuff done.
It's not so big.
It's not so big, and you've got a great place. I mean,
well, okay. Now I'm going to throw this back to Brendan on that.
Okay.
Because the implication of what you just said is that we have a strong mayor and that we're finished with the reforms of the 1920s. And of course, I don't believe that. I think we still have basically a city manager form of government, and that we have a directly elected mayor, and our directly elected mayor has some more power. We've seen that with Mayor Mallory and with Mayor Lucan in his last iteration. But those powers came out of the hide of council more than they came out of the city manager. So do these mayors that you're talking about really relate to the mayors that we have and are electing?
Well, I think if you answer the question about what you're right. This city is we don't quite have a strong mayor. Truly, we probably have a stronger.
We don't have an executive.
We
mayor.
have a stronger mayor.
Okay.
And all four of these mayors in the books, we're talking about Ed Koch and Richard Daley and Buddy Cianci and Ed Rendell. They were all strong mayors. I mean, they could pick up the phone and order a department head around or fire a department head if they needed to. I think that'll be an interesting part of the discussion because we'll be able to really have a conversation about our system and say, are we limited by the fact that we've got this kind of city manager form of government that still exists? Would we be better off in a place with a true executive mayor? So I'm hoping that that's an interesting part of the discussion because people have wildly different opinions on that. Right. But I think by the end of this, you see that these folks who had real power, who were really executive mayors, I mean, it would be interesting to see what that would really be like in Cincinnati.
Yeah. Give Chuderace apoplexy, but besides that, Albert, do you have a favorite one of these four books?
I guess it's the Ed Rendell book.
So everybody likes the Ed Rendell book.
Yeah, it's great.
So, Prayer for the City.
Because he's such a great character. I mean, Ed Rendell, and is probably the first. Yes, I do. I like his story. I like Ed Rendell, and Buzz Bissinger is a great writer.
Okay, and you're going to do something with the Niehoff lecture this year that relates to this as well.
It does. Robert Caro, who wrote The Power Broker, in addition to the huge Johnson biography, wrote about the uses of municipal power and who can get it, how you get it, and so forth. So it directly relates to all four of these books. Yeah. And Robert Caro will be here for our Niehoff lecture in November.
And right before the election.
Right before the election, exactly.
So the date is
November 2nd.
November 2nd. So that's really kind of interesting positioning.
Yes.
And positioning this whole discussion. Brendan, who do you hope comes?
I think, well, I hope lots of people come. First of all, it's a great discussion if you're interested, if you live in the city, even if you don't live in the city. One of the interesting things about these four mayors is whether or not you lived in the suburbs of Philadelphia or the suburbs of Chicago, Ed Rendell or Richard Daley was your mayor. And that's very much true here in Cincinnati. The mayor of Cincinnati may only represent 300 and some thousand people who live in the city, but they really represent the entire region and the community. They speak for the city. Great mayors become who their city are, or they represent who their city is. And I think that, so I hope people come who are interested in politics, who are interested in the city, who are interested in talking about where we need to go as a community and what kind of leader we want to have at 8th and Plum.
And I'm really serious that this is a great opportunity to draw people in who maybe don't know the mercantile and want to get involved for the first time, because this is exactly the kind of thing you do all the time, right?
We do it throughout the year. We've got discussion groups going almost every month, and we've got an architectural one going on right now. We'll be having them on other subjects throughout the year. Yes, it is great, and it's limited size.
Okay, I want to make sure people know how to find this. If you would like to be part of the American Mayor discussion at the Mercantile Library, the sessions will be at lunchtime, noon to 1:30, beginning Wednesday, July the 17th. Other sessions will be each month through October. If you want detailed information, I recommend that you go to the website, www.mercantilelibrary.com, or call 513-621-0717. The fee to participate is very reasonable, especially if you're a library member. If this is the great chance to visit the library and join and get that lower fee. So, if you know people who would like this show and cannot figure out where it has moved, let them know. 6 a.m. on Local 12, 11:30 on the CW, and especially remind folks that the program is accessible online anytime at local12.com. Have a good week, and we will see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you. Stay right there.